In December 1847, a group of spiritualists took their meeting hall apart, brick by brick, and rebuilt it at the edge of the Ohio River. Days later, with a gathering going on inside, the flooded river washed out the south wall, and as sound, 17 of the settlement's 32 people died. The town was called Utopia. That is where this list begins. Utopia sits in the Ohio River Valley, and it is far from the strangest story we found there. That place makes this list. So do 9 others. A hamlet of 254 people, governed by dogs since 1998. A town with no road, where the only way out was walking a live railroad through a brick tunnel. A coal camp so forgotten by its own state that it wrote to the Kremlin for help. Stick with us to the end, because number 1 is a city at the meeting of 2 great rivers, with a downtown built for 15,000 people, and fewer than 1,600 left in it. We go looking for the places that fell off the map. Subscribe if that is your kind of thing. Today we are counting down 10 Ohio River Valley towns nobody talks about. Number 10, Rabbit Hash, Kentucky. The town that elects dogs. The mayor of Rabbit Hash is a Blue-Tick coonhound named Boone. He won in November 2024 with 14,162 votes in a town of 254 people. That math works because votes cost $1 each. Anyone on Earth can buy them. And there is no limit. Rabbit Hash never incorporated, which means it has never legally needed a mayor at all. In 1998, the historical society that owns the buildings needed money, turned the empty title into a fundraiser, and a dog won. The joke was lucrative enough to become the town's constitution. The 2024 election raised over $26,000, and that money goes into roofs and paint on 19th century buildings nobody else was going to save. They have needed it. On the night of February 13th, 2016, the General Store, in continuous operation since 1831, burned. 5 fire departments fought it in 9-degree cold. A fundraiser pulled in more than $34,000 in about 36 hours, and the store was rebuilt using period salvage lumber. Here's the part they still talk about. 2024, a robot called Ben AI entered the mayoral race and raised $4,201, finishing among the frontrunners, which prompted one resident to tell a news crew that the town did not want evil artificial intelligence in it. The store is open, the dogs are off-leash, and Boone's term runs through 2028. He is, by every measure that matters there, doing fine. Number 9, Metropolis, Illinois. Superman's hometown runs on uranium. Metropolis sits on the Ohio River in Massac County, directly across from Paducah, Kentucky. It was named in 1839 by founders who assumed the river would make it a great industrial city. It did not. Population today, 5,969. On June 9, 1972, the Illinois House of Representatives officially proclaimed it the hometown of Superman. With DC Comics authorization, the town went all in. Plans were drawn for the amazing world of Superman, 1,000 acres, $50 million, and a 200-foot statue, with cars driving in between the legs to enter the park. Then the oil crisis hit, the banks pulled out, and the whole thing collapsed inside 2 years. It took Metropolis more than a decade to try again, and the second attempt was a 7-foot fiberglass Superman that cost about $1,000. The Chamber of Commerce used to hand out free packets of kryptonite to children. DC's lawyers shut that down. The chunks had never been submitted for approval, and they were a choking hazard. Here's the thing. About 2 miles from that statue is Metropolis Works, built in 1958, and it is the only facility in the United States that converts raw uranium into the gas that becomes nuclear fuel. It is licensed to hold 150 million pounds of uranium ore on an 1,100-acre site. It was idled in 2018, restarted in 2023, and is projected to put out more than 10,000 tons this year. So the souvenir kryptonite was the legal hazard. The statue is still on the square, the museum is open, the festival runs every June, and the plant is expanding. 2 mythologies. one town, and only one of them is radioactive. Number 8. Old Shawneetown, Illinois. The town the government moved. In January and February of 1937, the Ohio River came over 60-foot levees and put Shawneetown under 15 feet of water. When it drained, 20 of the town's 400 homes were still habitable. This was not a new problem. Shawneetown was laid out in 1810 as a shipping point for nearby salt springs, which placed it directly on the floodplain of the only highway that mattered. It flooded in 1883, in 1898, in 1913. Each time, the levee went up higher. In 1937, the levee lost. So on December 14, 1937, the state of Illinois and the federal government approved something that had never been done before: the removal of an entire American town. The move began in June 1938. Buildings were physically hauled 3 miles inland to high ground. It dragged on for years, partly because of the logistics and partly because of the lawsuits. Not everyone went. A faction dug in and stayed on the floodplain behind the levee. Locals called them river rats. In 1956, the remnant of the original site was separately incorporated as Old Shawneetown, and it is still there. 113 people at the last census, down from 193 in 2010. What they kept is worth a drive. Shawneetown opened the first bank in Illinois Territory in 1816, and the Greek Revival Bank building, raised in 1839, is the oldest bank building in the state. 5 massive Doric columns over an empty street. It was deeded to Illinois in 1942 and named to the state's most endangered historic places list in 2024. There are now 2 Shawneetowns 3 miles apart, and the older one never legally ceased to exist. It just stopped being somewhere. Anyone decided to live. Number 7. Sistersville, West Virginia. The boomtown whose last lifeline sank. Sistersville has 1,413 residents, and the architecture of a city 5 times that size. Queen Anne Mansions, a hotel from 1895, a historic district with 215 contributing buildings. That mismatch has a date on it. In 1892, a well came in at Polecat Hollow, and by 1893, Sistersville was the biggest oil boom town in the United States. The population went from about 600 in 1888 to 7,000 by 1898. Derricks were drilled in residential yards. West Virginia was outproducing Pennsylvania. Then the field played out. The oil left around 1910. The people followed, and the buildings stayed because buildings cannot follow anybody. Through all of it, Farmtown, boom, and the century of quiet afterward, one thing never stopped running. The ferry across to Fly, Ohio, began around 1817, franchised by the General Assembly of Virginia. West Virginia was not a state yet. The Ohio side was still the Northwest Territory. The first boat was powered by a horse on a treadmill. It was the last operating vehicle ferry on West Virginia's 277 miles of the Ohio River. On April 9th of this year, it took on water at its own landing and capsized. Crews raised it on the 29th using a derrick boat built in 1954. On June 2nd, the insurer declared the boat unrepairable. The payout after salvage costs came to about $162,000. Replacements run around $250,000. On July 1st, the city council postponed the decision. The town is intact. The restored oil derrick still stands on the riverbank. The barge is fine. The one thing that outlasted everything is the thing they are now trying to afford. Number 6. Cave in Rock, Illinois. The tavern that ate its customers. In the frontier decades, the Ohio River was a one-way conveyor belt. Flatboats loaded with families and cargo went downstream and could not easily come back. That fact created an opportunity, and the opportunity was a hole in a limestone bluff in what is now Hardin County, a dry, high-ceilinged room running about 100 feet into the rock, with a view up and down the water long enough to watch a boat approach for an hour. Counterfeiters used it in the 1,790 seconds. In 1797, a Revolutionary War. Militia captain named Samuel Mason moved his operation in, and Mason understood something the others had not. Chasing boats is work, advertising is not. In 1799, a sign went up over the mouth of the cave reading, "Wilson's Liquor Vault" and "House for Entertainment, crews tied up voluntarily." What happened after that varied. Some were robbed and put ashore, some joined, some were never seen again. One caution on all of this. Dr. Mark Wagner, staff archaeologist at Southern Illinois University Carbondale, points out that of every outlaw attached to this cave in legend, the historical record confirms exactly one, Samuel Mason, briefly, in 1797. The rest is tradition. Here's the detail that survives the fact-checking. In October 1829, the county court across the river in Kentucky granted the ferry franchise at this crossing to a man named James Ford, the same James Ford historians linked to the Ford's Ferry Gang, which preyed on the people using it. The village has 228 residents now. Illinois bought 64 acres, including the cave in 1929. The park is 204 acres today, and you can walk straight into the room. The ferry still runs. Nobody meets you at the door anymore. Number 5. Moonville, Ohio, the town with no road. Moonville never had a road, not a bad road, none. It existed because in the mid-1800s, the Marietta and Cincinnati Railroad cut a tunnel through a ridge above Raccoon Creek to reach coal and iron in country too broken for anything else. The company built a line, people built a town along it, and the line was the only way in or out. Groceries, mail, courtship, and men walking home at night all moved along a live track through a narrow brick tunnel with no shoulder. The town peaked at just over 100 people in the 1,870 seconds. The mines began closing in the early 1,900 seconds. The last family left in 1947. Every building was gone by the 1,960 seconds. The line was abandoned in 1988 and the rails were pulled up. Which leaves the ghost stories, and they should be labeled as exactly that. The tunnel is Ohio's most famous haunted site, with a full cast, the brakeman, the lavender lady, the bully, and the details contradict each other in every version told. What is not in dispute is why a place this small produced that many legends for a century. Walking the tracks was the only option anybody had. Since 2001, the Moonville Rail Trail Association has been converting the corridor, securing 16 miles of former railroad property for 2 county commissions. You drive a paved road, then a 1-lane gravel track. Then you park in Zaleski State Forest and walk in. The town is gone. The buildings are gone. The rails are gone. The only 2 things left in that forest are the tunnel and the cemetery, which tells you most of what you need to know about living there. We opened this video with Utopia. Let us know in the comments if that one caught you off guard, because we are coming back to it shortly with a whole story. If you are enjoying the deep dive, a thumbs up genuinely helps more people find these. The top 4 are where this gets heavy. Number 4, Moundsville, West Virginia. 3. Impossible things in one small town. Moundsville sits on the Ohio River about 10 miles south of Wheeling. Chartered in 1832, population roughly 8,000, down from 11,000 in 1990. Within a few blocks of each other, it holds 3 things that have no business being in the same town. The first is Grave Creek Mound, 62 feet high, 240 feet across, built in stages by the Adena culture between roughly 250 and 150 BC. It is the largest conical burial mound in the United States. Raising, it took something like 57,000 tons of earth, moved by hand. Archaeologists estimate around 3 million basket loads. A moat 910 feet long once ringed it. The flat ground the town sits on was once covered in mounds and earthworks. Farmers and treasure hunters destroyed the rest. This one survived. The second thing is directly across the street. The West Virginia Penitentiary was begun in 1866 and opened in 1876. Gothic, stone, deliberately intimidating. It ran until 1995. Prison records document 94 executions, 85 by hanging and 9 in an electric chair built by an inmate. Public hangings ended after 1931 when Frank Heyer was decapitated by the drop in front of spectators. After that, executions were by invitation only. So for more than a century, a monument to the dead and a machine for making more of them faced each other across a street. Here's the detail that stops people cold. In 1948, a stone gift shop was built at the base of that 2,000-year-old burial mound, built by inmates from the prison across the road to sell souvenirs made by prisoners. The third thing is on the ridge above town. In 1968, a Hare Krishna community bought a farm outside Moundsville. It was meant to be rustic. Then, Keith Ham, Kirtanamanda Swami, decided the modest house being built for his guru should be a palace instead. Devotees who had never laid stone taught themselves marble setting and gold leafing. Prabhupada's Palace of Gold opened in 1979, roughly $600,000 in materials, 52 varieties of marble and onyx, teak, stained glass, 22-karat gold, leaf. The man it was built for died in 1977, so it became a memorial rather than a home. Kirtanananda was expelled from the movement in 1987 and pleaded in 1996 to racketeering, mail fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder. All three sites are open, the mound is free and you can climb it. The prison runs midnight tours. A $4.25 million restoration of the palace began in 2011, and in 2022, more than 35,000 people came to see it. You can stand on top of a 2,000-year-old grave, look down into a prison yard, and see gold domes on the hill behind it. Nobody planned that. Number 3. Utopia, Ohio. They moved the building to the water. We started this video here. Here is the whole thing. Utopia was founded in 1844 in Clermont County by American followers of the French philosopher Charles Fourier. Families paid $25 a year for a wooden house and a small parcel inside a planned, perfect society. It was functionally a real estate proposition dressed as a philosophy, and it dissolved in 1846, financial failure and disenchantment with Fourierism, in the words of the state historical marker. The land went to the next set of believers. In 1847, John O. Wattles brought a society of spiritualists there, looking for somewhere secluded to practice. They wanted to be closer to the water. So they took the dining hall and town hall apart and rebuilt it, brick by brick, at the river's edge, finishing in December. People who had lived on that river their entire lives told them not to. On the night of December 13th, 1847, with the Ohio far above flood stage, and families already sheltering in the hall because their own houses were flooding, there was a gathering inside. The river took out the south wall. The building collapsed and swept people into the water. 17 died, drowned, or killed by the cold. The settlement had 32 people in it. The survivors scattered. Then Josiah Warren bought the land and tried a third utopia on the exact same spot, an individualist anarchist colony with a store that priced goods strictly by the labor hours inside them, paid for in labor notes. Ohio put up a historical marker at the site in 2003. It closes by saying that the idea of the perfect society died there. People still live at Utopia. There is no town to arrive at. A sign on the river highway, some half-buried stone that visitors treat as a shrine, and a piece of ground that 3 separate groups of people were certain they could perfect. Number 2. Vulcan, West Virginia. The town that asked the Soviet Union for help. Vulcan is a strip of land in Mingo County with mountains on 3 sides and the Tug Fork on the 4th. There is no road into it from West Virginia. Coal companies built the town in the early 20th century, and coal companies built the only access, a narrow, swinging footbridge, across the river to a road on the Kentucky side. The railroad added a passenger stop. By 1968, the coal was exhausted. The mines closed, passenger service ended, and most people left. About 50 families stayed. Then, in the mid-1970s, the wooden footbridge rotted through and collapsed. That left those 50 families with no legal way in or out of their own town. They began walking the Norfolk and Western Railroad's private right-of-way, which was both illegal and dangerous. Children heading for the school bus sometimes had to crawl underneath parked rail cars. They asked the state for a bridge. The Department of Highways weighed the population against the cost and said no. They asked again. 2 years of letters to state and federal government produced nothing at all. Here's the wild part. Vulcan's unofficial mayor was a man named John Robinette, a bartender and carnival worker, and Robinette worked out that his neighbor's invisibility was itself the leverage. The one audience on Earth guaranteed to care about an American town too poor for its own government was the government the United States was in a Cold War with. In 1977, he wrote to the Soviet embassy in Washington and to officials in East Germany, requesting foreign aid to build a bridge. He considered writing to Israel as well. In December 1977, a Soviet journalist named Iona Andronov obtained State Department clearance and came to Vulcan. Within roughly an hour of his arrival, reporters were told that West Virginia would replace the bridge. The legislature found $1.3 million. The state's official position was that the bridge had always been planned, and these things simply take months. Nobody in Vulcan believed that. Local newspapers and radio stations received threats that any bridge built with communist money would be blown up. The one-lane bridge opened in 1980, and it is still the only public way in. Which means that to reach a West Virginia town, you drive up the Kentucky side and cross over. 2 years of official silence undone by one foreign reporter with a notebook. Number 1, Cairo, Illinois. The city at the center of the map that emptied itself. You come in from the north and drive through a gap in a flood wall. Washington Avenue opens in front of you wide and 19th century and built for commerce with storefronts standing open to the sky and trees growing up through the brick. It is very quiet. 2 rivers are working on either side of you, close enough that you hear towboat engines and barge horns from both at once, and there are birds nesting inside buildings that used to be banks. This is the southernmost point in Illinois, on a narrow wedge of land where the Ohio meets the Mississippi. Geographically, it is one of the most valuable positions in inland America. Cairo should have been St. Louis. In 1920, 15,203 people lived here. The 2020 census counted 1,733. The 2024 estimate is 1,523. Roughly, 9 out of every 10 residents gone. Some of that is structural. Steamboats gave way to railroads and the bridge went in at Thebes instead. The interstates came through and did not stop. The ground is low, it floods, and everything is expensive to build. But that is not what emptied Cairo. Cairo's schools were not integrated until 1967, 13 years after Brown versus Board of Education. Businesses brought in white workers from Kentucky and Missouri rather than hire locally. When black residents pushed to use the public swimming pool, the city converted it into a private club. When that did not hold, the city closed the pool and filled it with concrete. In July 1967, a 19-year-old black soldier home on leave, Private Robert L. Hunt Jr., was found hanged in a cell at the Cairo police station. Authorities ruled it a suicide. The black community did not accept that. And what followed was not a riot that burned out over a weekend. It was 6 years. Firebombings, shootouts, boycotts. 170 nights of gunfire in 1969 alone. 4 people died. The black community organized as the United Front in 1969 under a Cairo native, Reverend Charles Cone, and was met by white vigilante groups. By 1973, there were essentially no downtown businesses left to boycott. White residents left. The tax base went with them. Then, 50 years later, the arithmetic finished. In 2016, federal housing officials seized control of the local housing authority. In April 2017, they announced that the Elmwood and McBride complexes were unfit for habitation, that about 400 residents would be permanently relocated, and that no replacement public housing would be built here. 1 in 4 people in Cairo lived in public housing. Up to 40% of the school district's children lived in those 2 complexes. The Secretary of Housing and Urban Development visited and said the city was on life support. In 2019, the buildings came down under a $1.9 million demolition contract. There is a plan for a new river port. 40 million state dollars were designated in 2019. As of last year, it was still in studies. Cairo is not empty. The port operates, the schools run. People live there. But this town stands at the single best address in the middle of the country, and for a century it kept choosing to have nothing rather than share it. The pool is still down there, under the concrete. There are more of these, drowned towns, company towns, and a few we could not verify well enough to put on the list. My own favorite is Vulcan because that bridge is still standing, and it exists for exactly one reason. Somebody wrote a letter to the wrong government on purpose. Which one surprised you, and which town did we miss? Subscribe, and we will keep going.